There's a clip from a recent Ben Shapiro show that I think articulates how conservatives think about the economics of pensions and what they get wrong about the upcoming pension time bomb. Have a listen.
Social Security is a pyramid scheme. It is a Ponzi scheme. We are taking out trillions of dollars in debt to fund people retiring from work who are not somehow unable to work. That was the point that I'm making, is that many of the people that we are paying not to work right now, who are 65 years old, yes, they paid into the system, but that is because the system should not have taken their money in the first place. You should not have your money taken away from you by the federal government and then spent somewhere else. And then later, somebody else has to fill you in. You should be able to keep your own money. That's how you plan for retirement.
Ben Shapiro called Social Security, which is the US retirement scheme, he called it a Ponzi scheme. This is just a slightly more extreme version of a very common argument made by mainstream economic commentators all around the world. Like recently in France, which saw almost a year of fierce protests before finally President Macron signed an increase into the pension age into law. The argument that these conservative commentators make has two basic truths, but it has one big mistake. The first basic truth is that populations in many countries are indeed changing. In the future, because of lower birth rates and longer life expectancy, there will be more retirees and fewer workers. The second truth is that many people get great personal purpose and meaning from the work that they do, if they choose to keep working. But the big mistake at the heart of the conservative argument is about the economics of it all, which we're going to explain in this video in 3 parts. First, we'll use a recent academic paper from the London School of Economics to illustrate how the economics of pensions really work. Then we'll explain what conservative commentators get wrong. And lastly, we'll point the way towards a progressive alternative. Nicholas Barr from the London School of Economics has written a paper with an excellent title called Pension Design and the Failed Economics of Squirrels. I love it. In it, he explains that unlike squirrels gathering nuts during summer, which they then eat during the winter, people don't save up food now to eat in 30 years' time. If you want to have a nice oat latte every week of your retirement, you can't just buy 10,000 of them in your 30s and save them. You can't even pay someone now to make your coffee in 30 years' time. That coffee shop will be closed, the barista will be gone. It's just not a way to think about saving for the future. You can save money, but money isn't a thing like oat mocha lattes or squirrel's nuts. Money is an IOU from the economy. Usually you get money for your contributions to the economy, which you can then use to get other people's contributions, like the barista's coffee. You can exchange work with people. But what happens when you save money while you're working and making contributions, but only spend that money later, decades later, when you're not working? To approach that question like an economist, I'm going to use an analogy of 3 imaginary islands. On each of the islands, food is fruit that's grown in high trees, and only young people can climb the trees to get the food. So that means that old people have to rely on the young people for their food. On the first imaginary island, island number 1, they rely on a system of just pure generosity. Young people share a portion of their harvest with the elderly because they know that one day they too will get old and they'll depend on the generosity of the younger generation. But what happens when the population changes, like the one we're about to face into, and all of a sudden there's lots more older people and not as many young people? Now there's fewer young people working as harvesters, so everyone gets less food. So let's look at island number 2, where they do a slightly different system. They use a system of money, of conch shells, and this is a currency that older people use to pay younger people for food. Younger people will accept the conch shells, knowing that they too can use this money when they retire to pay younger people for food. On this island number 2, there's a slightly different distribution in wealth, because some people can exchange more food for conch shells, some less, but the overall system hits the exact same problem when the population changes. Fewer younger workers means less food harvested, and again, just like on Island 1, everyone will be worse off. Now let's look at the last island, island number 3. On island number 3, we take a slightly different tack. Young people still spend their time gathering food, but they spend their spare time building ladders. Each ladder doubles the amount of food a young person can gather in a day. So when the population change hits Island 3, even though there's now only half the number of young people, they can still gather the same amount of food. The time they spent investing in building ladders has saved the day.
You're making decisions for children who are not capable of making decisions for themselves.
So conservatives like Ben Shapiro often think that we're in island number 2. They worry that social security will run out of money, or that people should be able to keep their own money, as if the number of conch shells on the island is what really matters. But it's not. It is correct to note that population changes shifting the ratio of workers to pensioners will be consequential. Of course it will be. But we're on island number 3. We dramatically improve our productivity every generation. We build ladders and we build so much more. The real question we should be asking isn't how we save money. It's not how do you save more conch shells. It's how do you invest to improve productivity? Every generation, how do we do it more? But before we dig into that next section, I want to acknowledge one or two good points that people like Shapiro do make. Namely, that work is not inherently bad. People should be able to work after 65, which I completely agree with. There is a Japanese concept called ikigai, which the dictionary translates to that which gives a person a sense of purpose or a reason for living. But my favorite translation of ikigai is your reason to get out of bed in the morning. Many studies have shown that ikigai is associated with so many benefits, so I'd hate to see us force someone to give up work, especially if that work is their ikigai. But, and this is the crucial part for this discussion, Noriyuki Nakanishi at the Osaka University Medical School said that behaviors which make one feel ikigai are not actions which individuals are forced to take, but they are spontaneous activities which people undertake willingly. And I think that's the key point here. Retirement is how we give people the option to opt out of the world of work and paid employment. It lets them stop doing work that may have been physically toiling, like laboring on a building site or in a chemical factory or scrubbing cleaning all day long, or indeed work that is mentally exhausting or anxiety-inducing. This is a basic component of our social contract, and one I think is really worth defending, even as we face into major demographic change. In her book, Work, Retire, Repeat, Labour economist Teresa Ghilarducci sums it up by saying, yes, Granny deserves a good job if she wants one, but working until you drop is not a plan for a civilized society. In 1930, history's most important economist, John Maynard Keynes, predicted that by 2030 the average human would be 8 times richer, and because of that, we'd all be working 15-hour work weeks. So what went wrong with his prediction? Well, he was right that our productivity would improve. Well, actually, he was kind of wrong. Our productivity improved, but so much more than the 8 times that he predicted. But we didn't trade productivity gain for extra time off, at least not in the ways he imagined. We just kept working at higher rates, and now our economies produce unfathomable quantities of stuff. But that's not the whole picture. We actually did take some of the productivity gains and translate that into less working time. But instead of each person gradually lowering their hours until we got to 15 hours a work week, we instead made collective leaps to all take the same blocks of time off. So the weekend, for example, went from a 1-day weekend to a 2-day weekend, and that was only established in the 1930s when Keynes wrote that paper. We've brought in public holidays in lots of countries, but the biggest gains have been made at the beginning and the end of our lives. Kids now stay in education much longer, as countries introduce free second-level education and stricter child labour laws. And on the other end of the scale, which is the topic of this video, countries introduced a retirement age and pensions. And as average life expectancy has grown older, people have spent more of their years in retirement. On our island number 3, we didn't use the ladders to spend less time harvesting food. Instead, we used it to spend more time in education at the start of our lives and in retirement at the end. So now that populations are changing and the portion of working age to non-working age decreases, we have 2 what are inherently political choices ahead of us. The first choice is the conservative approach, to raise the retirement age to 68, 69, 70 and beyond, to find ways to keep more people in the workforce longer, whether they choose it or not. The second option is what I think is the more progressive approach, to hold firm to the gains we've made. Just like we wouldn't want to give back the weekend or start making children work again, we should hold the retirement age where it is. If people live longer in retirement, that's how they should benefit from the productive gains they have made over the course of their working careers. Instead of buckling in the face of demographic change and giving up on this great social bargain, we should do like the great generations before us and rise to meet the challenge with science, with technology, and with productivity growth.